Hey folks, Valentin the Mad here, and today we'll be looking at the destruction effects in Battlefield 2042 in the full version. At what's there, some of the key features, and the big question, whether it delivers a responsive experience. Now keep in mind that I will be repeating things that I discussed in the video on the beta, so if you watched that and just want the answer to the big question, feel free to skip ahead to the conclusions. Now, let's get going. First up is the building destruction. So, one thing people were wondering about in the comment section of the beta video is whether we have the Bad Company style two-story destructible buildings. And as far as I can see, we only have them in the remade maps in Portal. Maybe there is something somewhere, but I haven't seen buildings of this type in the main portion of the game. Anyway, here's how that looks in the remake of Arica Harbor. As for the main portion of the game, what I saw can basically be divided into two categories. Buildings and structures you can chew up but not bring down, and massive indestructible ones. In the first category, you have buildings that can get chewed up decently well, and then you have things like this. So you got the grey sections you can play with, but not the rest. And honestly, this divide and the way it's visualized, it's just comical to me. What I found odd here is that even in the destructible sections, you still have beats that don't respond. In quite a few of them. Now as for the big indestructible ones, there usually are a whole bunch of objects that you can damage and destroy in them. Some of those are the Levolution-like events on the map, but you don't have a great deal of meaningful destruction on the structure itself. As for the good, I have to know that you actually have some destructible interiors now. It's not very detailed or leaves much of an aftermath, but it's more than we had in previous games. Some interior walls can be destroyed too. The keyword, as always, is some. Now as for terrain and vegetation damage, like in the previous games, it's quite good. On explosive hits, you'll see the terrain deform, and any grass that was there will be gone. Of course, there is a difference between explosives. A tank blast and a grenade will leave very different results. And the terrain damage is permanent, so the first crater at the start of the match will stick around until the very end. Now as for some of the limitations, there is a limit of how deep craters can go. Sometimes you only have damage but no deformation. All you have for rocks is a vanishing decal. And a thing I noticed that I don't recall seeing in previous games is actually a limit on how many craters there can be. At a certain point towards the end of the game I saw that explosions are not causing any terrain damage. But once again, it was towards the end of a round, so that limit is not a small one. As for the vegetation, it looks very nice in the game, so deleting it definitely gives more of an impact to those explosive hits. And, in my impression, practically all vegetation can be either completely destroyed or very heavily damaged. The only indestructible trees I've seen were actually a part of decorations in a building. Out in the wild, they are all destructible. As for the Levolution-like events, those are actually much smaller than I thought they would be. What you have is things like bringing down parts of a ship's hull, taking down a radio tower, exploding another tank, and several other events. And no doubt, those are quite cool, but the exploding rocket in the beta set expectations pretty high in that regard, so the lack of massive destruction events will definitely be a letdown for some. In conclusion, it doesn't deliver a responsive experience. The action is generally focused around structures that don't show a great deal of meaningful damage, or locations that can get chewed up to varying degrees but not really be demolished. Now you do have locations that really will gradually get transformed, explosion by explosion, but that's because they lack big structures and what you have is basically terrain waiting to get deformed and flora waiting to get blown up. And those are mainly the locations between the objectives and not where the action is centered. So, in my impression, the verdict from the beta still stands. If the gameplay is appealing to you, you appreciate the various destructibles you have scattered around, but if what you're looking for is combat in responsive environments that gradually change around you as the fight goes on, this is not it, and Bad Company 2 is still the best one in the series in that regard. So, that's it for today. Do let me know how you feel in the comment section, and if you enjoyed the video, subscribe and share it around. And consider supporting the channel on Patreon. For $1 a month you get these videos a week early, you get the interviews a week early, and you help out the channel. So a big thank you to all the Patreon members, and consider joining as well. Also, if you like the music you hear in the intro, outro, and in the background, the YouTube and Spotify playlists are in the description. Until next time.